Everything started with me and a couple of my buddies hanging out at my place. For the sake of this story, I will name my two friends Michael and Lucas. Basically, everyone got pretty much wasted from drinking too much cheap bourbon Michael has brought with him. It was around 2 a.m. when Lucas, still a bit drunk, suggested we should go and explore the abandoned insane asylum. For the context, we all live together in the same small town. There is not much going on there, but when you drive about 15 miles on empty back roads, you should come across the old mental hospital, which has been vegetating ever since it was abandoned in the 1960s due to unknown reasons. Back to the story. So since there was really nothing better to do, we all agreed to the 30-minute drive. We grabbed our backpacks, some water, 3 flashlights, and a big hunting knife for protection. Lucas also brought a couple of graffiti cans for obvious reasons. He was into that stuff at the time. The drive was relatively unspectacular, with the exception that Michael almost ran over a rattlesnake laying in the middle of the road. When we arrived, the sight of this huge asylum just standing there for all these years made me feel a little uneasy. But my doubts quickly evaporated as Michael and Lucas were already going around the place looking for an entrance. We finally found a window that was not completely boarded up with beams, and then crawled headfirst through the small opening. I quickly got on my feet and let my eyes get adjusted to the darkness that completely surrounded us. We powered up our flashlights and began wandering through the corridors with rooms on either sides. The walls were pretty much all covered in graffiti. Lucas suggested that we should look out for a basement entrance, with the intention of finding a free spot for his graffiti. After a 30-minute search, we finally found the basement entrance. The stairs were rusty and creaked with every step. The whole basement smelled terrible. Lucas quickly disappeared down a long hallway with rooms on either sides, Michael and I keeping pace up behind him. As we wandered off further into the dark hallway, which our cheap flashlights only poorly lit up, the terrible smell grew even worse. I can only describe it as a mixture of vomit and rotten eggs. What struck me as odd was that all the walls were pretty much clean, unlike the site we made at the first floor. It almost seemed like nobody has ever made it all the way to explore the basement level. Everything was going relatively smooth up until the point when Lucas started making noise by shaking his graffiti cans in order to prepare them for his act of vandalism. He started spray painting one of the nearby walls. Michael and I just watched him do his thing. When he finally finished his piece, the smell of aerosol in the air almost drowned out the horrible stink that was still in the air. As we made our way down the hallway, I could tell that the smell came from a small room further down to the left of us. At this point, we were all pretty much freaking out what we would find in that room. I had the hunting knife tight in my hands as I approached the room and shined my flashlight inside. The light beam hit, and I kid you not, there was a circle of burned-out candles. In the center of the candles was a dark object hanging from the ceiling. At this point, I had to vomit because of the smell coming from this room. Michael was the bravest one of us as he stumbled into this room grabbing a metal bar from the pile of junk next to him, poking the object with it, as right then we realized the huge amount of dark brownish stains on the floor under that thing. We all quickly sobered up due to the situation as we heard several voices and fast-approaching footsteps from across the other hallway. I never ran that fast in my entire life. It's really amazing what adrenaline can do. We finally reached the set of stairs and sprinted through the floor. As we finally reached the window we had entered from, Michael also vomited onto the floor. Lucas then realized that he had left his backpack full of his stuff in the basement, as he had not enough time to pick it up. We sprinted out front and got into my car and hightailed it out of there. We only have suggestions of what we saw in that basement. Maybe there was some kind of satanic ritual taking place out there, or we just stumbled across a murder scene. We haven't told anybody this story. In fact, Lucas told me that he had not had a good night of sleep since that day, knowing he left his wallet in his backpack there, keeping all his personal information including his home address. This starts when I finished my first year of college in the Bay Area. I worked my ass off in school and I just wanted to have a wild summer, and I would do anything I could to get out of the house. My cousin was and still is my best friend, and we basically did anything and everything together. When there wasn't anything to do, we would take walks together around my rural neighborhood. I always lived near this old hospital, which used to operate as the biggest trauma unit in my area. Sometime when I was in high school, they shut the hospital down due to unknown reasons. It basically just sat there rotting for a few years before we found it. One day my cousin and I were drinking a cold one, taking one of our routine walks, and ventured away from our usual route through this peaceful random field. We stumbled across this huge parking lot after making it out of the field, but it didn't hit me that this was the old hospital's parking lot we found. We made our way through the lot until we saw this massively grand building standing outside of the lot. The deteriorated banner said, "Emergency Room," and this is when we knew we struck gold and stumbled across a back route to this abandoned hospital. We knew of this place, but we had never been here. We hadn't heard any weird, outlandish urban legends, nor had anyone we knew been here before us. We pushed forward and checked the perimeter. To our surprise, the first door we walked up to had a rock jammed in between the door frames so we could waltz in. This is when we realized this could potentially be a bad idea if we got caught, and we could suffer some consequences. We agreed we would be quiet and respectful and make it a quick trip. This is where things take a turn, or a few turns. We enter the building and it was the most deafening quiet I have ever heard. The sound of the door closing behind us sounded like a literal bombing. Once the echo stopped from the door, it dawned on us that this place was really creepy. We walked slowly, but the floor is covered in glass, which makes even the smallest steps sound like Bigfoot lumbering around a library. We find a patient room which still has a bed inside. We stop at the doorway to look inside because the floor looks sketchy. Out of nowhere, from around the corner, we hear the faintest, slow, drawn-out whistling. I've never in my life stopped what I was doing so suddenly. I just stare wide-eyed at my cousin, because even a whisper sounds like yelling in this place. We both have our feet planted to the ground, because if we move those too, we will make ourselves known. At this point, we both assumed there could potentially be a squatter or guard of some sort. My cousin hand gestures to me that we have to leave and we can't just stand here because the whistling was obviously not going to stop at that point. We turn towards the opposite side of the corner that the whistling is at, and are tiptoeing out to a perfect silence. Then, the whistling stops. We freeze. Then we hear the glass crunching from around the corner. We start running. Once we get to the door we came from, we realize we didn't put a rock in the door frame when we came in, and the door is completely stuck. As we're trying to get this door to open, the glass crunching is now running. We hear the glass crunching until it sounds like it's dangerously close. I am horrified. We turn around to try another door and the noise of the glass is literally right in front of us, yet no one is there. No one. We book it to a door that says pharmacy and peel open the door. The pharmacy is completely empty, except a single, perfectly placed and aligned landline phone plugged into the wall. The phone is off the hook and is making a dial tone. The whole thing was perfectly lined up and centered with the whole room. I've never seen anything like it. The dial tone was so loud in such an empty place. There wasn't power throughout the hospital, so how was it working? I was in shock. We left and never went back. I had heard of some other kids going there at night. They told me they heard whistling and thought someone was lurking in the shadows the whole time. It's a freaky world out there. My best friend Jay used to work at a restaurant in a very bad area. She had moved there from our little suburb about 35 minutes away. I still lived in the suburb with my parents, so my street smarts weren't the best. This was 3 years ago. I was 19 at the time, so driving around to visit friends was and is one of my favorite pastimes. One day, I decided to stop by the restaurant to see Jay, as I'd done it a few times before and I was friends with all her coworkers. My friend was busy and she made me wait around with a few of the others for a bit until her break, then came to chat with me. At this time, I was very anti-purse and just kept a wristlet, a little wallet you can keep around your wrist. After chatting for about 30 minutes, I left the restaurant and walked back to my car. After driving for a while, I noticed I had left my wallet, so I texted Jay telling her to grab it for me and where I had probably left it. I already knew there was a possibility that it was gone, being that I had left it in a busy restaurant in city center, and Jay confirmed it was indeed gone. My dad canceled all the credit cards, but I was still holding on to hope that it would be returned, as I did have my ID in there. The next day, I get a text from Jay. She tells me someone called the restaurant and said they had my wallet and that she had given them my number. I was really happy about this, but knew I would have to meet up with a stranger, so I decided not to tell my parents. I didn't get a text until the next morning. The person said that they had my wallet and wanted to give it back, but never have a name or description. I didn't care. I thanked them profusely, and asked when I could meet them. Hours later, they reply with an address and told me to stop by around 9 p.m. The address was about 20 minutes from the restaurant, which was also a really bad area, but that didn't worry me as I had left my wallet right around there. I get there around 9, and this is when I started to get freaked out. The house looked like it was previously a row home, but the one connecting it to the rest had been demolished. The windows were boarded up, and there were no lights coming from inside. The place was obviously abandoned, grass overgrown, weeds everywhere, graffiti all over it. You get the idea. The door, however, was not boarded up, and I could see it was ajar. I texted the number, and the person replied a second later telling me to come in. It was early summer, so while it wasn't completely dark out, it was getting there, and I would have needed a flashlight to see. So what do? Well, turn on my flashlight, of course. I get out of the car and look around in hopes of seeing someone. Nothing. So with phone flashlight in hand, I start walking up the dry rotted wooden steps to the front door. I crack the door open further. It's completely black, and when I shine my flashlight around, I can see there's no furniture. I thought I heard some quiet creaking from the upstairs, which I thought was strange. Why would the person text me to come in but then be hiding upstairs? At this point, I knew there was something wrong here. I was scared as hell, and I hightailed it back to my car. I should have pulled around the corner, but I didn't. I just called the police right there. 2 policemen arrive shortly after and walk right into the house with flashlights. Then 2 more pull up. They were inside for a long time, then they come out. With them, in handcuffs, are 2 skinny, scraggly, homeless-looking guys. I only got a good look at one, but I do remember the guy had visible sores on his face and arms. I assume they could be drug-related. As the cops walked them by my car, one of the guys looked in at me with the angriest expression I've ever seen. 2 of the officers came over to talk to me and had indeed found my wallet inside. All the money was gone, but the rest was intact. The cops reprimanded me for being so stupid. I drove home and never spoke of it to my parents. Only recently have I told them what happened. I'll never know what those guys were planning. Was it just someone messing with me and I called the cops on 2 random homeless guys living there? I never got another text from that number. I started carrying a purse after that,